Prior to the story found in today's gospel, where Jesus walks on water towards the boat carrying the disciples, there is John's death and the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus has just received word that John the Baptist, a friend and the one who baptized him, has been murdered. As many of us would do if we lost a close friend, Jesus wishes to have a moment to grieve alone. His time alone is interrupted by a crowd of 5,000 men plus women and children, to which Jesus speaks and feeds miraculously with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. The disciples were about to send the crowds away, but Jesus welcomes them into a time of fellowship and community with him and each other. Jesus' invitation to the crowd to stay, even though he probably could have used a moment to himself, gives insight into the life and ministry of Jesus and the kind of commitment he had to such ministry, serving and caring for people other than himself. When all is said and done, the crowds had been fed and tended to. Jesus sent the crowds away, and he sent his disciples ahead of him on their way across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus was finally alone. He went up onto the mount to spend time in prayer with God. During the night, Jesus was alone praying on the mount while the disciples were on the boat, attempting to get some rest as well. As the night turned into morning, the disciples were being woken up by the violent winds and crashing waves of a storm. Amidst the choppy seas, the disciples saw a figure walking toward them, and they believed it was a ghost. It was not a ghost at all, but Jesus walking on the water. As a congregant listening to this gospel text and sermons given on this text many Sundays before in my past 23 years, I've had several different parts of this story emphasized to draw a particular message out of the text. I've heard sermons on Peter in this story about his little faith. I've heard sermons on the disciples who do not recognize Jesus but instead see a ghost. I've heard sermons about the miracle of walking on water, on Peter sinking, on the storm, on a myriad of different angles. In my study of the text, I stumbled upon a new perspective which draws out something different from the text, focusing on Jesus and his moment alone on the mount praying. Jesus, yet again, as he is in many of the Bible stories, is an example of the life and ministry I feel called into as a pastor in the church, but also as the Christian life we are being called into daily as children of God. Now more than ever, many of us can identify with this need for a moment to get away, to just be, to grieve, to pray, to take a break. There is so much going on. Personally, I've been busy juggling schoolwork, work, CPE work, prep work for my candidacy endorsement, anti-racism work, and just regular daily life work, all during the midst of a global pandemic. I've been stressed and exhausted, and some days I just want to give up. Much like Jesus needed a moment to be in prayer and rest in the heavenly Creator, I too could use a moment to spend in rest and prayer. I'm almost positive that even though most of our lives have shifted into a mostly online mode from our own houses, many of you are still busy, stressed, exhausted, and feeling a bit, if not a crap ton more grief added onto all of that just because of the context we're living in. Many of us could really use a moment alone or a moment to just be with ourselves and regroup. We need a recharge or rejuvenation of sorts where we are able to step away and collect our strength and hope and resilience in order that we might keep going as we all inevitably must. I think Jesus' example of self-care is important to consider within the context of the reality we are currently in. Jesus tended to the needs of others, but when he really needed a moment to be with God, to grieve and to rest, he took that moment. When he had gotten the time to rest and just be, he was renewed and prepared to continue his ministry. Jesus walked out onto the water to catch up with the disciples who obviously needed and expected him to be near and save them from the storm. The storm went calm as Jesus got into the boat with the disciples, and they journeyed the rest of the way to the shore where they knew a crowd would be awaiting their arrival. Jesus' ministry, serving and caring for all people, continued. In this same way, when we take a moment to ourselves, we must at some point rejoin the world, continuing to work for justice, peace, and love. Jesus, as he typically does, models our Christian call, the kind of commitment it will take, and the necessary pauses in between to gather power, strength, and endurance for the long road ahead, which is Christian ministry. If you are weary, broken down, in need of rest, or just need a breath, take time to step away. Call on God to restore you and fill you up, to give you strength and courage, to renew your faith and hope. For he will restore, renew, provide, and hold you up in ways you may not have thought were any longer possible, especially in such a time of despair. And when you have taken this time and you feel ready to begin again, enter into the world understanding and answering your Christian call to serve and love one another in all that we say, in all that we do. Amen.